All right, let's go ahead and get started. Can you click the next slide for me, Molly? Super, thank you. Well, wanted to recap a little bit with the goals for our session today, and not just our session, but really this entire webinar series. Together through this session, we're making visible the momentum that we're seeing around Thriving Together, and this series gives an opportunity to come together and build relationships and exchange ideas. And really, what is the momentum that we're starting to see? It also gives us a chance, importantly, to hear from folks about what's working and what else is needed to really sustain our momentum together. Next slide, please. But I do want to acknowledge that while there are many around this virtual meeting space that have helped shape the Vital Conditions Framework and the North Star of all people and places thriving together, there are also those that may be newer to this work and newer to the thriving ethos and the Vital Conditions Framework. So just a little background, very briefly, the Thriving Together ethos consists of a relentless commitment to intergenerational well-being and equity, just legacies for thriving together and being better ancestors, deepening practices of shared stewardship. And all of that is marked by commitments to reinforcing a unifying narrative, bridging differences, measuring progress, and investing in the vital conditions as multi-solvers. So very briefly, on the left-hand side of your screen there, the 7 vital conditions are reflected. And these are the things that we all need every day to thrive. Belonging and civic muscle is at the center of this and is really the animating force for advancing each of the other vital conditions. Next slide, please. So this movement is supported by an intentional and distributed infrastructure consisting of role models, shared stewardship practices, well-being measurement, tools, curricula, policies, funding, and learning with peers like we're doing today. And many of you today are holding a piece of that puzzle. One important piece of the puzzle is a national and scalable infrastructure to support this work. And I'm here as a representative of IP3, the Institute for People, Place, and Possibility, and we're the stewards of Community Commons and IP3 Assess. And we're honored to play a small part of this movement by providing access to content, data, and tools for learning and taking action together. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at some of the growing signs and signals of momentum. These are some of the examples of thought leadership that we've seen recently. And again, these links will be shared after the call, so you can really dig into them, and I encourage you to do so. Lots of really good stuff here. From encouraging civic infrastructure to address issues like loneliness and disconnection, by providing venues for people to engage and connect, all the way to how emphasizing interconnection and mutual care really can strengthen democracy and can be a counter to authoritarian tendencies. Next slide, please. We've also selected a selection of new tools to help orient you and those you might be working with around key elements of building a movement, including this video around movement ecology, a new book on multi-solving, and a new toolkit to reshape narratives around health equity. Next slide, please. And here we have some practical examples of how a state coalition, Healthy Communities Delaware, a health system, Loma Linda University Health in California, and a regional collaborative, Be Well Palm Beach County in Florida, are all infusing and aligning the vital conditions into their work and the stories of impact that are rising from that. Next slide, please. And as you see here, stewards are rising all across the country. And I will now turn it over to Bobby Milstein to share a little bit about what he's been seeing and to introduce our community stewards who are here today to share their story. Bobby?
Super, thank you all. Welcome on behalf of our team at Ripple and Rethink Health. One of the most energizing things that I experience in this work is turning away from the sort of signs of chaos and cruelty that we can see, sort of all about. But if you really start looking for people who are turning toward each other, who are beginning to sort of act in ways that really bring out their their full aspirations of what they most want to create in the communities and with the people and places they love. You can see signs of this happening everywhere. This map is very partial, incomplete, but it's just a beginning portrait of the places that we know, and we begin to hear stories of really impressive stewards who are rising in this work, connecting with people um, who didn't necessarily even see themselves as having kindred spirits and collaborators who are interested in doing this work together. And the main thing that we often hear is, "I didn't know other people shared my values." So one of the things we try to do with these occasional webinars is to look for signs of where we see growing momentum in this movement to thrive together, and begin to hear firsthand stories from more than one storyteller about what it looks like and feels like to do this work in the context where where they live and with the people and places they touch. So today's spotlight is from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a place that I've visited several times. I have felt the energy up close, being with these colleagues, and it is a real treat to introduce them to you today. I'll just give you the quickest intro to the. Let me go to the next slide. Um, oh, wait, I'm sorry. Well, I'm going to give you an introduction to the folks there first, but first, a quick poll. Um, you know, uh, let's put this poll up, Molly. Uh, Aaron described the essence of this thriving together ethos as an expectation that, we can get to a future with all people and places thriving together. And we have stories of people who are doing that work, but in the privacy of a anonymous poll, what's your answer to this question about, we can create a world where all people and places thrive together, no exceptions? Um, how much do you agree or disagree with that statement? Ooh, I think I think the poll ended by accident there, Molly. Can we restart it?
Yeah, it should be sharing now, but I am realizing we're gonna reshare this poll later on. And there's both questions in the poll, and there should only be one at a time. So don't worry about it. We'll
Yeah.
redo this.
Can we redo it though? We only have
Yes.
two responses here. There we go.
Yeah.
To about 30, that's about 3/4 of us have answered this. In a second, we'll take a peek at this. Um, Okay, I think we're stable here at about 80%. Let's take a look at these results. I love this question because on some days my answer is a hell yes, we can do it. And on other days, I wonder, really, are we going to be able to do this? So I am sympathetic for the few people who were on the neutral or disagree or, don't know, because this is a serious move to get to a place where everybody can thrive together. Our systems have never been set up for that. So, while I'm sympathetic with the skeptics among us, I want to side in solidarity with the optimists here, the people and the majority of you who think that this is something we can do. But no matter what, it's going to take some serious work. And I think that's really what I listen for in the stories that we hear from colleagues across the country. And it's a real treat to hear perspectives from the four that we've got here today. So we can go back to the slides and so you can see their faces in advance and understand. We've got the executive directors of three, well, actually four really impressive organizations in this work. Kellie Easton directs Action4Equity, she's going to tell you about that organization, what it does, but is a force of nature. When you've met Kellie and you never forget it. Adam Hill directs Forsyth Futures, is a decades old organization that colleagues across Winston-Salem have relied on to help fuel the data and the strategy and the progress reporting that goes on in the region. And Chuck Spong directs Love Out Loud. Say no more. It's in the title. You can feel the love that Chuck brings to this work and the connective tissue that Love Out Loud brings to an organization that is really trying to touch and engage every person and every organization in the region to be able to do their part in something that nobody can do alone. So those are our three colleagues from Winston-Salem. After the three tell their stories of what this work looks and feels like, we're really privileged to have Ruth Thomas-Squance, a longtime champion in this, who's a co-director of the Build Healthy Places Network and is now a social impact fellow at UC Berkeley. Has across their nationwide activities, Ruth is in a remarkable position to not only reflect on what we're seeing emerge in Winston-Salem, but put that against a national backdrop. So a real treat to have these four colleagues with us. And let's take the slides away. And Kellie, can we start with you about what it really feels like to do this work, and how do you know when it is, sort of just talk, or when there's real work getting done in this?
Yes, thank you. Again, Kellie Easton with Action4Equity, and it is definitely my pleasure to be with you all in this space. So I want to start by saying that I am a Winston-Salem native. I left in '99 and I returned in 2016. And upon returning, then there were a lot of things that I began to immediately take note of. Which actually led me into doing the work that I'm doing now. And so I just want to I want to emphasize in my talking points the power of community-led change, what it means to be a better ancestor, and how we really must shift from simply commemorating history and actually utilizing it as a resource in our work. And so one of the things that I noticed upon moving back to Winston-Salem was just the amount of awareness. You mentioned, Bobby, that Forsyth Futures has been around for a long time, a decades-old organization. So in addition to having a research hub in our community, research in our community, and being able to work with all the various institutions that make up our dominant power structure. We also have several colleges, Winston-Salem State University on one end of the community, and then Wake Forest on the other end. So there's a lot of research capacity. And then we have a community that's very rich in history. We commemorate our history. There's been several books written about the history of R.J. Reynolds and how wealth was built in our community. We have three strong community three foundations. And then we also, there are markers and there's rich storytelling. And all of that is very powerful. And like the preservation, especially in the time where, we are facing increasing the threat of erasure, all of that is important. But when it comes to the systems change work, one of the things that I realized is that, we had an awareness around the disparities, the inequities. Everybody knows that if you look at any map of Forsyth County, it's, you think of a donut. So around the community, those would be those lighter areas and like a heat map, if you will. And then in the center of it, it gets darker where it's capturing the disparities. And so there was a lot of awareness of that. And we all knew that. And I found that to be fascinating because it was leveraged in order to continue to develop the community, and in order to continue to invest in all the wonderful things that were happening in certain parts of our community. But then there was a lack of understanding as to why the conditions were the way that they are. Like, who's studying the systems and who's really studying how we're structured? If you look at the structure, then it's clear that some things are going well in certain areas of our community, and then in other areas there's just this history of just a disinvestment, a lack of investment. And so we all had that awareness, but it's like, well, where did the desire? Like, how do we shift from just having the simple awareness of what's happening, so we know that when certain things are done, then in certain communities, then, then we get in certain outcomes, but in others, there's not. But then how do we lean into the desire in order to ensure that that our entire community is able to thrive, that there aren't any disparities, and that the investment is happening throughout the community. And so one of the things that we really led into is to understanding like the socialization of our community, really going back and understanding like, how did we get here? Who's making decisions, who have the power to make decisions, and how have that power been maintained? And the more we're able to do that, then we've been able to cultivate, an analysis around the need of developing the type of infrastructures and mechanisms necessary in order to ensure that all the people in our community have the ability to thrive, that they are, have access to what they need to thrive. And that took work. And so one of the things that we know, and we've learned this through history, is that, there has always been a multiracial sector of movement work. And so being able to leverage the best of that, it takes work, but one of the first things you have to do is make sure that you are creating those culturally affirming safe spaces so that you can have a sense of well-being, so you can have that belonging, that you can authentically show up as who you are, for who you are, and be able to speak your truth. And so that the amount of intentionality that it goes into that is something that we don't think about all the time. And so that's the part, the nuance of systems change that I think is fundamentally important, and it's all rooted in culture. So when we're looking at, a lot of us are familiar with the iceberg, at the top of that, we always see the events, we see the outcomes, we see the disparities, but then it's not the top of that iceberg that maintains the iceberg. It's everything that's happening beneath the water. And so the more we're able to address that, the more we're going to be able to approve what those events and those outcomes are. And so in order to be able to leverage the best of our history and the people who actually have the desire to actually bring about change, then one of the things that we knew we had to do was to begin to break down silos. And breaking down silos is very intensive work, and especially when you're considering, the world of nonprofit. There isn't really any profit to be made. The investments that we receive. It's not a market-driven thing. And so it is a lot of times, historically, it's been a matter of who's been able to tell the story and what information they had in order to use that. And so at the heart of breaking down those silos, it's been able to create assets that's going to address like these multiple issues, and so with that, what Action4Equity and Forsyth Futures, what we've been able to do is to really bring our resources together, bring our understanding, the decades of experience that Forsyth Futures have in terms of research, in some ways, which they've gone public in sharing, that it's been extractive, and then been able to learn from that past and being able to utilize that in order to move forward. And in the same ways, when it comes to how do we engage our community authentically, and how are we creating spaces for people to show up affirmed in who they are, to be able to speak their truth. So then we have real data that we can begin to utilize in order to address those issues. When you begin to partner those two things, then what you have is community voice. You're able to be able to bring your voice in both quantitative data as well as that qualitative data that give nuance to what needs to happen in order to shift culture to bring about change. And so, the work that we've been able to do as we have been able to, one, align our resources and really begin to fundamentally change, the way that we practice our work, whether that's research or whether that is community engagement, and continuance to be intentional about learning with every iteration has been phenomenal. And then when you take that and you partner it with the work that Love Out Loud is doing in terms of of being able to foster really partnerships and to be able to bring some folks to the table who are not as far along, in their I'm gonna dare I say equity journey, but be able to bring those folks along to be able to understand like this is what's happening in our community, and it doesn't have to be this way. But in order to address that, then we got to get real about how we got here and what's maintaining the status quo. And so if we're going to create, again, those culturally affirming spaces where everybody can be able to show up and thrive, then, there are multiple aspects that are needed to be able to strengthen those type of collaborations. So one, you definitely need to have what we call the boundary leaders, those who are able to navigate various spaces without being able to navigate various spaces. And I'm going to say without necessarily compromising the principles in which they stand on and why we're doing this work in the first place. The other thing is we do have to have data. There are tools and mechanisms that we must utilize in order to build the type of infrastructure. So that technical piece is always going to be a priority. Not having those tools, not having access to those resources, speaks to volumes in terms of why the conditions are the way they are in certain aspects of our communities. So you need to be able to have that technical, the technical capacity in order to build it, and it need to be done with a level of rigor. But then you cannot forget the importance of the adaptive aspect of this work. We are incapable of achieving systems change without really looking at the type of value system that we are integrating into the systems that we are developing, and what behaviors are being incentivized versus how people are punished for being courageous. All of that matters. And so what we're doing in Forsyth County is grappling, with all these various aspects. And we are developing both the physical, the technical infrastructure, the civic infrastructure for the change, while also understanding the importance of being able to shift the paradigm of our culture.
Thank you, Kelly. That's so many words are standing out for me in what you just brought us into, right? History, culture, boundaries, the kind of technical skills, but the civic purpose of it all, that it is ultimately an expression of our humanity, of how we're going to shared humanity. And are we really courageous enough to create conditions for everyone to thrive, which would be a historic move, but it's going to take a different kind of culture to create that kind of experience. At least that's some of the things I'm hearing in what you've just said. I'm wondering, we have a little bit of time in this agenda. And before we turn to Adam and Chuck, can you just tell us about some of the people who you've seen drawn into this work? Like when you see this work in action, who are some of the change makers that you're proud to see bringing voice and bringing action into this agenda that you've just described?
Yeah, so my immediate response are actually, I'm going to say the two people who I'm partnering with to collaborate to do this work. We've been public about this, so I'll ask for your permission. Y'all know what story I'm going to tell. Maybe both of you, Adam, Chuck. Can I share? Okay, Adam, it's like it's already too late. Well. So the journey did not begin as it wasn't all like cotton candy and rainbows for either one of us, for in terms of the partnership with Love Out Loud or the partnership with Forsyth Futures. With Love Out Loud with Chuck, we were on a panel together, and I found myself kind of just calling out some folks and kind of calling in, due to some work that was giving voice to our community. However, I did not feel, nor did the people who I stand in solidarity with, felt that it was the authentic voice of, what it means to live in the community, specifically like the Black community. And so I did. I wound up, calling Chuck out at this event, and afterwards, we had coffee, and even in that conversation, the one thing that he always reminds me of, and he says, he has said ever since, is that I said, what I shared with him is that you got to be in right relationship with Black leadership, as you're doing this work. And there weren't any other words, right there. And I just had to remind him, we leave this and we can have, we can come to a place where there's some mutual agreement. Still, when I walk away from this table, I'm walking away as a Black woman and you walk away as a white man. And I think that, from that point forward, there was no, Chuck didn't say, hey, I'm going to be doing this or doing that. But what happened was a genuine relationship was formed. And what I've seen is that he had my back, even at the expense of his own. And so that is what called me into an authentic relationship. And I think that when you're talking about doing, the courageous thing, that safety is necessary, because as a Black woman, I cannot say that I feel safe in doing this work. I do this work because it's a calling. And it is better to do it when you know that who you're doing it with are true comrades. And the same thing with Forsyth Futures. Like Adam was kicked out of an event that I invited him to, because they're like, why is Forsyth Futures here? It wasn't personal in regards to Adam, but it was just the history of the organization. And I acknowledged that. And, what can I do? Like there was some truth behind what they were saying. And honestly, I'm not going to say that I, did a level of vetting. And it's, these sacred places that we create where we talk about the needs of our community and the pains of our community is something that we must protect. What I found over time with Adam is that as a leader, that he has been very intentional with leaning into, well, what does it mean to be able to do this work in a way where it's going to bring about the change that their mission calls for. I sit on the board of Forsyth Futures, so I know the level of intentionality as an organization the leaders are bringing. I know as working with Adam, he too, one day we had a conversation and he said, I realized that, we are in this together, for the good and the bad. And that's what it takes when you're going to have true collaboration. So breaking down silos means you are really coming into alignment, and you have to have a shared vision. You both, you have to have your sights on the same mission, and you have to grapple with what it takes in order to maintain that, even during the tough times. And I would say that I'm able to be here with these two white men because that work is happening, and it continues to happen. And we're continue to be tested at it as well. That's the thing that we don't talk about, when it comes to multiracial organizing. It's the things that we don't talk about in terms of what it takes to shift culture. But if we're going to do it authentically, where everybody feels like I can be who I am in this work, then, that's what it takes. And there's a level of consciousness that goes beyond anything we can really study. It's about being in relationship and really, focusing on our character, and what does it mean to have integrity in mission-driven work.
Thank you for sharing that and for bringing our conversation to that level, right? There are, as I see it, like hundreds, maybe thousands of players doing different things across Winston-Salem, but even just the strength of what happens when three people, individuals, start connecting with each other in new ways and then bring their organizations into a deeper interdependent space, what that can ignite by way of momentum in this work. So anyway, you've talked about Adam and Chuck. Let's meet Adam and then Chuck. So Adam, tell us your part of the story and maybe a little bit of the history of how you've seen, kind of the emergence of this current era around Thriving Together. But how is that any different or maybe similar to steps that have been made to pursue change in the past in Winston-Salem?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the introduction, Bobby. Adam Hill with Forsyth Futures. I've been with the organization for 12 years. I think it was mentioned, a little earlier, Forsyth Futures has played a number of different roles over the years in Forsyth County. Has helped be a convener and facilitator of community change efforts. as well as providing data and research support for those type of efforts across the community. And I'd say in the last 15 years, really, we've kind of honed in on playing that data and research support role for community change efforts. Just a bit about my background with the organization. I started actually on as the data and research support for an education initiative. Started kind of expanding my role and overseeing all of our partnerships involved in education work, health and wellness, housing, financial and economic security. So started to really kind of oversee all of our work where we were really partnering with these different kind of community change efforts. And then have been in the executive director role for the last 5 years. With that said, along the way, I've kind of worn all the hats. So I've certainly helped facilitate this work, as well as kind of led that data and research support kind of function and role. So I wanted to point out a couple things of kind of how collaborative work has changed over time in Forsyth County. And I think some of the emerging, conditions that are present that are really helping us kind of advance this work and do it in ways that, I think will be really more impactful for our community. I think Kellie named it well. I think one of the major ways, work has changed over time is really centering, residents and kind of those grassroots communities and kind of driving in terms of what the agenda is and what we're identifying as solutions. So I think she kind of talked through that piece really well. So I wanted to highlight kind of a couple other pieces. So Forsyth Futures has been involved in lots of kind of different cross-sector spaces. So like I said, education work, health and wellness, financial security. So we've kind of been able to see from a bird's eye view how all this work has been happening. And I think one major kind of challenge or barrier is that there are really there have been siloed collaborations within just our county. And so, I mean, I think that's been a major barrier and not having really good visibility across initiatives and identifying, how are we coordinating across all of our, different work and initiatives we have. And what that does is because there's not good awareness, you get new things cropping up all the time that are potentially duplicative and conflicting with the existing kind of efforts and work. So I do think the vital conditions framework is starting to move us towards having a common framework, and which is huge. And I think those who've been involved in this, it's just kind of a huge relief of like, let's not have diverging and fragmented frameworks, but like let's all kind of be working from a common framework and really identify how we all fit in and are contributing towards our high level community kind of outcomes and goals. So I do think those silos are breaking down between collaborations. And I think, those who have been involved are kind of recognizing the importance of that. I think another thing I wanted to lift up is, Chuck likes to joke, that him and I are going from kind of like meeting to meeting and collaborative to collaborative. And we do get to see kind of all the different cross-sector work happening, in the county. And, so I think we were kind of early adopters of how do we, break down silos across initiative and be working from a common framework. However, I think there's in recent years and like the last year or so, there's been just so many more people coming along. And I think in the past, when there's kind of been individuals or small groups of people who are really advocating for, how do we break down the silos, and work from common frameworks, I think there's this kind of critical mass of other actors who are helping kind of move this work forward and advocate for, this different approach. So I think that makes it much more resilient and ultimately sustainable, is that we have just many more actors who are kind of naming, we need to be using common frameworks and working across silos. I think maybe one of the biggest shifts has been how organizations, I think, are kind of showing up at the table. I think in early iterations that I was involved in, organizations would come to the table and, be engaged in collaborative work and see it as kind of outside of their organizational mission, and, being kind of extra work that they were involved in. So I think something we're really trying to emphasize is how do we make sure organizations are bringing their whole selves into it, and really seeing their kind of mission and their priorities and strategies and programs as, part of all of the work. I remember actually, probably 12 years ago, being in an early childhood collaborative group. And one of the people there, and I vividly remember this, was saying, where I saw this work, it was in a small town, and all the organizations, when they came to the table, they kind of put their resources on the table and said, what do we need to do? How do we need to shift things around to really get to kind of the results we want to see? So really kind of there being more openness and vulnerability from organizations to bring their whole selves in, and to be open to saying, like, how do we need to shift kind of how we're operating and doing work? So I do think that's starting to happen. I think we still have kind of work to do as a community, but I would say, there are changes there. And I think, as Kelly lifted up, Forsyth Futures and Action for Equity, I think we're trying to lead by example there. And, I think 3 years ago, Forsyth Futures identified we needed to be more engage community more in driving how we conduct our research, how it's used. And Action for Equity was starting to do that community engaged, community-led research. So we really just, decided, like, let's do this together versus kind of building things separately and doing them separately. So I think ever since then, we've kind of gotten to the extreme case at this point where we now have integrated budgets. We're doing collaborative fundraising, and yeah, so just kind of fully integrating and really figuring out how to leverage and optimize the resources we have on hand. So I think those were a few of the things kind of I wanted to lift up. I think certainly, there's much more progress we have to make as a community, but I think those are some of the kind of the bright spots of how we're kind of breaking through in the system change collaborative work. And I did see Chanel on here, and I think, the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust has been really supportive of funding things in new and different ways. So I think having funders like that in Winston-Salem Foundation here locally is allowing us to kind of break down some of these barriers that have gotten in the way in the past.
Yeah, I'm really appreciative of the sketch that you've just given us, right? This sort of ironic phrase of siloed collaborations, and the the mode of working where collaboration is seen as somehow extra beyond the day job, to if I'm hearing you right, that collaboration is now the means through which the work is getting done. And that, the kind of era of collective impact maybe prepared more and more organizations to start looking outside of their own walls, but now actually bringing more and more people from different walks of life into a unifying focus on at least something that holds them together broadly around vital conditions and thriving together is it's sort of like a helpful layer on top of the the sort of arc of collaborative work that's been going on, it sounds like, for quite a while. And um, I'm also really thankful that you've brought up the idea of integrated budgets and collaborative fundraising and the role of philanthropy in this work. Because what does it mean to be a place-based investor in this? Um, Especially when historically the work was the work and collaboration was like sort of the means. But now if collaboration is the work, then it ought to be funded. And some of the movement building activities that we're describing here, are really part of what needs to be more investable and structured into this. So thank you, Adam. It's a really helpful organizational sort of context that you've given us. Let's turn to Chuck, and then we can, sort of um, catch any questions that are coming up in chat. So please offer any questions or comments that are standing out for you in the chat, because we'll pick those up momentarily. Chuck, what does this work look and feel like for you? I'll just kick this off by saying a colleague that we know and love described the work in Winston-Salem as a clutter of doing good. But really that clutter is starting to gain direction and momentum and force behind it. So as a person who gets to see people in different in different moments throughout their lives in Winston-Salem, sometimes facing real adversity, and you're the one that's standing with them in that, and other times strategizing over what we can do in the decades ahead. How does this work look and feel to you?
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. And before I forget, I know I speak for Adam and Kelly in thanking all you guys from Ripple. I see Monty on the call, and you and Kamal and Becky have just invested so much in us, and we feel the power of that, frankly. And the affirmation has been a driving force for some of what we feel these days. Yeah, so I'm the praxis guy. Like I didn't study any of this theory. I have a degree in music theory, as a matter of fact. And so, like, what the world am I doing this job here? But Adam mentioned that he and I, in particular, were running around to all these collective impact groups. So I was the faith guy. So I'm an ordained minister. Kind of what I do grew out of a church and now it's an independent nonprofit. But I was like one of the few faith people that said, I'll serve on that council or that committee or that board. And I'm beating the drum for all other faith leaders to do that a little more. But by nature of that, I found myself in various settings and just doing a whole lot of showing up and listening. And that began in 2008. And I'd say that's been fundamental to how our organization has approached this work, how the conversations have unfolded, is just showing up, listening, and then watching for places to connect and to amplify stuff happening around the city and to make introductions and to connect the dots. And so there was no theory for us to do that. We just started to sense, well, somebody's got to be doing that, as Bobby called it, connective tissue work. And so we just started kind of leaning into that. And then last November, I know it's been a year and a half ago, November, another guy on this call, Tim Gallagher, I'll give Tim a shout out. I think there was a conversation with Kelly that I don't even know how it all came about, but eventually we found ourselves on the call with Monty. And I can guarantee it, Adam and I had no interest in one more framework. And yet when Monty jumped on that call, just his approach, his support, there was just a way that he interacted with us that completely captured, frankly, maybe I'm the feeder, okay, captured our hearts and began to draw us in some pretty powerful ways. And I think part of, for me personally, in the vital conditions, that the center, and I call it the bullseye of belonging and civic muscle, just named what it is that we've been trying to do. We're not the program delivers in the county, and we're not subject matter experts on a lot of things. We may learn a lot from showing up to all these meetings, but we are more trying to help build and hold space for people across lines of difference to really strengthen our sense of belonging with one another. And then begin to really have the conversations to move beyond just kind of, in church world, we call it compassion and mercy work, to justice and equity and policy and advocacy. How do you have the civic muscle to get beyond just the sometimes the low-hanging fruit we all tend to go after. So we've leaned into that. We came up with a definition of kind of how we think about thriving together here that might be helpful. Thriving together for us is not about starting new things. It's not about like launching new programs, and it is a whole lot more about aligning and strengthening stuff already happening, collaborations, resources that's already like bubbling around in community, particularly at the community level, and all to reinforce the vital conditions for well-being and justice. A while ago, somebody shared this diagram. Maybe you've all seen it. Again, I'm the praxis guide and study all this stuff, but I found this exorbitantly helpful. On the bottom left, I think everybody tends to come at it with this: my church, my health system, my business, we got stuff going on. How does everybody relate to us? And it's a pretty radical shift to like say, no, we're going to look at a shared purpose. In the case of people on this call, framed up in the Thriving Together framework, and figure out how do we relate to that shared sense of purpose. And I have found that to be super helpful in how we approach these things. We just started engaging people through their faith institutions in the work of becoming engaged in community actions. And as a result of that, we also found, obviously, that people they have different identities. They're not just a member of that congregation or, in this position in a business, but they serve on a board and their kids playing soccer and they have other identities. And we just began to like look at that person over here and connect with that person over there, and just began to, I guess, build the connectivity of Winston. And then 2 years ago or so, our three organizations just began to lean into our unique strengths. So as has already been lifted up, Action4Equity is like profoundly good and astute, and like the leader in centering community voice and engaging community and residents. And that has never been the case in our community. Like we say it, but it's usually an afterthought. Well, Action4Equity really began to do that work, as well as on a macro level, engage state and policy level work, state and national wise. Obviously, by nature of their data and measures function, Forsyth Futures has been engaged with a lot of the collective impact work. And then we, as Love Out Loud, has really been more at the meso level, the institutional level of all those things. We also have this one big advantage here, and some of you on this call do too. I miss my old hometown of Chicago, but this little mid-sized town of ours, a big country town, it is not hard to connect people. Like you just got to be a little bit intentional about that. And so we do that, and we show up for things all over the place. I wanted to just show you a couple pictures of how that looks. I'll see if I can keep my my production hat together here. Like yesterday, I was this is the Hispanic Resource Coalition. It's just a bunch of people that are focusing on connecting with but mostly providers that are engaging our Spanish-speaking community. And we were there yesterday. The guy there that's looking up at the guy, he's on our team. His name is Mark Madrigal. He is out doing this same kind of work of showing up and being present in the community, watching for how to connect across lines of difference. This is one of my favorite pictures. This was yesterday with one of our former board members. But there's just a life and a presence to that. This morning, I'm sitting at a Starbucks, and I really wanted to take a selfie of this moment, but it felt super awkward. So I found a stock photo. I'm sitting there, and two things happened. One of our county commissioners was sitting behind me, Ms. Woodbury, Kelly, and they were working on the Happy Hill housing thing. And so, of course, we didn't just, there was a moment of connection that happened. They went on with their work, but we kind of, were aware of what they were doing. And then as I walked out the door, the head of our local world relief effort was talking to a landlord dude about affordable housing for refugees in this moment of insane disruption. And just being out in the public space was a part of how we have just leaned into all the things we all do and how we could navigate that together. Probably another big culmination for us. We had a big convening of about 250, 260 leaders last November that Bobby and Kamal came down and facilitated. And that's this one. And you see at the top here, it says Thriving Together and Love Out Loud strategic plan. Bobby talked about integrative budgets and things. Well, we have all rebuilt our strategic plans around the Thriving Together framework and around our collective work. And so this is just a report that I did for our board that talked about our own particular strategic plan of convening the community, building partnerships, and doing our part to deepen the community's understanding of systems change. So this is a report to them. The highlight being down here, the next last bullet point of Thursday, we convened about 260 multi-sector leaders to talk about this, our common work. But we also led up to with a series of meetings to engage different stakeholders. We met with 13 Hispanic organizers and leaders. Then on Wednesday, once Bobby and Kamal landed, like we worked them to engage our community in some really important ways. We met with 46 elected leaders and officials and business leaders. Wednesday afternoon, we had faith leaders together. Wednesday night, Kelly and one of our team members, Tanya and Asheron and others, convened 50 female Black organizers and leaders to talk about their specific lens of the work and how they work together. And then the last thing was after the big convening, we had this big celebration that night. What we do does not look like this. I think that's probably an understatement. What we do looks like this. I throw that out there just as a reminder. It is crazy, messy, complicated work. And as Bobby says, we're kind of at the edge of the known universe to try and take on this whole framework and like try and hold it in a way that we might figure out how that all fits together. But you know, part of that comes from, as it's already been lifted up, just kind of a commitment to open, honest communication towards like not letting conflict go underground, like doing the hard work of staying current relationally and speaking truth to one another. We have a commitment to culturally affirming practices and to multiracial work and to anti-racist dialogue. Like that, we don't arrive at that. We are constantly. We just had a situation recently where we had to really address some really tough things, and yet we are committed to staying like leaning into those things rather than just trying to skate past them. All right, and then I want to close with just you saw at the bottom of that one thing, we had a party at the end of the Thriving Together. So we had this big convening thing. Bobby and Kamal come down. We have a bunch of people together. We're all exhausted, but one person says we need to get together and celebrate what just happened, kind of a cast party of sorts. And so I just wanted to end my time with some of those pictures just because I feel like it captures just some of the energy. So this was at Catherine's house. She'll probably kill me, but you'll see Kamal right here on the far right there, and Bobby's kind of over there. And like we laughed and cried and told stories and even talked about some of the hard stuff. And this is Catherine's living room. Just with our different partners. This is a glamour shot of a couple of our people. And then of course presented, we wanted to honor Kelly in that process. And so, yeah, that's just, obviously can't tell the whole story, but maybe that gets you a little bit of the grit of how we relate to one another and how we do the work of this Thriving Together.
Thank you for sharing it. I didn't know that you would make it so personal about us, but I think the privilege to accompany people who are doing this work every day in the place they live and being able to see it as part of something bigger is really amazing. And I think that's the privilege that I experience in this work is just to see how the Winston-Salem way of doing this may not be identical to what we saw in Inland Empire, which was spotlighted, in the fall, or the scores of other places where there is a story emerging. But anyway, that's kind of a piece of what we're all here to talk about is what does this look and feel like, but how does it take on meaning and purpose in place? And the keywords that I heard you talk about is just that willingness to be present in all the spaces that aren't necessarily about your organization, but where your organization can contribute or learn or just stand in solidarity. And then the connection, the willingness to be to sort of keep conflict open and not underground, and the culture that can create. We've heard culture many times, starting with Kelly's comments. Let's turn to Ruth. What are you seeing, and what stands out to you in the Winston-Salem story, but also what stands out for you in terms of the arc and trajectory of this work across the country?
Wow, thanks, Bobby, and thanks for the invitation. Gosh, what a hard act to follow. I mean, isn't that amazing? I've got like so many notes scribbled here because it's so inspirational. I think what it feels like is it's beautifully messy, beautifully complicated and committed, but very real in how this work happens. And I think it's really important to reveal that, because otherwise, if we present smooth, perfect frameworks, people think that's how the work plays out on the ground. And the first sign of a bump or a problem, they get put off, right? Because they think, oh, we're doing it wrong, or this feels uncomfortable, rather than going in with that expectation, like this may hurt a little, but it's important to sort of get there. So I mean, there's so many things, and I'm going to talk a little bit through my slides from. Move a little bit from some of the mechanic work to some of the high-level pictures of what these things can look like. My name's Ruth Thomas-Squance. I am co-executive director at Build Healthy Places Network. We're a national center, so we work at this intersection between community development, healthcare, and public health. And really, we work to partner with organizations and networks across these sectors with a view to advance community-led solutions. So it was great to hear that from Kellie, and to address health equity. So we adopted the vital conditions several years ago, as Bobby had mentioned, and we have found it extremely useful, actually, and accessible for those who are outside of health. I think Chuck was mentioning, I'm not trained in this. A lot of people are not in health. They don't see themselves in health work. And what we found with the framework, that it was clear, it demonstrates how what you're doing in your transportation or in your economic development or in your housing work is really going to impact health. Sort of that picture of that complex network. I've been thinking a lot about Audre Lorde's quote, "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." And I think health is a perfect example of that we never experience health as a single issue. So I'll talk a little bit about some of our work and frameworks, and hopefully, happy to circle back and talk about Winston-Salem and Forsyth and seed a little bit of that into this. So next slide. So as I said, we conduct sort of place-based cohorts across the country, and we do field building work in which we create tools and resources. So the idea is to support multi-sector collaborations as they come up, and people who are interested in doing them from across different sectors. So one of the projects we did, we collaborated with NACDD, which is National Association of Chronic Disease Directors, on a thought leader roundtable with national leaders from public health and community development, which Bobby, you helped us with, you participated, I think you led some of the session too in my place. And then, so as we all came together to think about health equity and really what it means, to work across sectors in that sort of whole messy space and the reality of it, and to sort of challenge our perspective of where health, and we've talked about health and place and race all intersect really, and as drivers of health. And we framed the whole meeting around the vital conditions, because what better framework could you use? And there was a lot of interest across organizations and about learning more about each other and the work that we want to do. And the output of this was one of the outputs of this was a resource that I'm going to share, and I think we'll be able to share these resources after, the Public Health Primer. And it really sort of introduces, some of these tools and introduces the vital condition framework and the context of the partnerships that you want to see happening. And one of the themes, I mentioned this because one of the themes that emerged from this really resonates with what we have heard today, and it's around maintaining communities at the center of the decision-making process. And that's something we know is critical to creating that sense of belonging and civic muscle, that hub or the bullseye that we said, of the vital conditions wheel. And I think what's great to see in this Forsyth, so excuse my Forsyth, and the cohesion around the vital conditions is that it really pulled together existing success and then just took it from good to great, So, and I what I love about that Thriving Together is that it's direct, it's all people, all places, no exception. And I think in today's climate, it moves us away from distracting arguments around words to what are we meaning about diversity? What do we mean when we talk about inclusion? What are the values and intentions underlying that? What is it about? What are we actually trying to do with this, rather than just phrases and terms that are kicked around? And it's all about people. It's about including all places, creating an America where there are thriving communities everywhere. And I think that, this really is a great example, and it really speaks to that Thriving Together movement that people are sort of saying. What does it look like on the ground? What do all these words mean when they're in a community? What are we actually trying to achieve? So I think on the next slide, so going back to the roundtable, another challenge that we heard shared across these leaders from different sectors, but both public health and the community development sector, and it's very much was a foreshadow of where we are today, was practitioners saying they wanted to advance health equity, but having challenges being able to use certain words and phrases, and how that disrupted their capacity to build alliances and the communities that they needed. So building from that conversation and through additional research, we created this resource that I think we mentioned earlier we just released, I think, a couple of weeks ago. That's a fact sheet. It's a new addition to our fact sheet series that's on crafting a health equity-centered narrative. And it really gathers a number of resources and ideas from the field, including Ripple's work, to help practitioners in their effort to communicate across sectors and, bridge ideas. And I think one of the things Chuck mentioned, a couple of building space across lines of difference, that how do we bridge those kind of things. And one of the terms that came up was around value-based conversation, which a little bit of research revealed, it comes from sales and finding value for the customer. And here we're really talking about how do we identify our shared values? How do we prioritize those in our communities? And this concept of shared stewardship to collectively change the fabric, that infrastructure, if you like, in which we all experience health. Because, as we're talking, if we know that health is experienced in 3D, I like to say, it's experienced in places, it's inextricably linked to place and the spaces where we live and the communities that we're part of. So there is a real power in this moment of telling the stories of what this looks like in the real world right now, so that people understand what success can look like, and bringing it back to identifiable sort of real changes that happen at the local level. I think, there's a sense of this department, this office, all these changes happening, but there's also a sense that the systems need to catch up with what we know needs to happen on the ground, especially in conditions of underinvestment. So more happens when we work together to make changes to our communities that support opportunities for health and well-being, that we want to include everyone. So this fact sheet is really, it's a starting point. It's about those conversations, some research sort of surveying the field and with practitioners. And we found that, there's some examples. Communities are indeed attempting to expand how we talk and think about this work. One of the things that we featured was bridging as a concept mentioned in the fact sheet that's from the Othering and Belonging Institute. And I love that they unapologetically emphasize inclusion. They are unapologetically center belonging, just like, the vital conditions framework, because it's about connecting communities. It's about connecting sectors that we've mentioned, today, breaking those silos that don't normally come together in order to create a larger base of support. And it's for the shared goals that we identify. If we center community in that process, It's about connecting it to the goals of what a community wants. How do those in their community, how do they connect that to the values they've expressed? A collective shared set of values, and this is how we want our community to be able to thrive together. So I'll go to the next slide. And one part of that, and it kind of speaks a little bit to one of the slides we saw earlier, is about sort of expanding that health partnership ecosystem. And this is a diagram that we shared in another resource, which is a rural playbook, which I'll mention briefly a little later, to illustrate the kinds of groups and sectors you might consider as you see partnership, as you start to broaden that lens or have a deeper focal length on who is relevant to your work. And I love that image of, like, rather than how do they relate to us, how do you relate to them? It might be changing that vision of, like, how are we connecting with some of these people that we don't normally pay attention to, that might have a change. And so when we look at the ecosystem, one aspect I'm going to call out that is key to supporting community-led solutions is the power of local government and community partnerships to create lasting local change. And I say that as a plug because of next slide, we just released a resource. And this was done in partnership with Wild, Wonderful and Healthy West Virginia and funded by the Benedum Foundation, which is one of the dots on the slide that Bobby shared earlier. And they actually use the vital conditions for their cohort of partnerships across the state that are trying to advance upstream drivers of health. So they asked us that question of what do they need to begin to understand these partnerships? Because as those evolved, it became evident that we needed to be able to improve how we were working together in that. So the resource is called Engaging Local Government to Promote Health and Prosperity in West Virginia. It holds many points that are relevant in any place. It's got strategies to understanding local government landscape, how you build relationships that are, we heard about this today, steeped in trust, essential, bridging across divides to really show the benefits of these partnerships. And even has things like, there's a sample MOU that folks can use in their work. So this page just shows some of the key questions that an organization might ask in terms of identifying decision-making staff, understanding budget cycles and aligning your priorities. And what opportunities you have to create local shared local stewardship. So I just thought I'd mention that one. So one place we shared a few of these was in our rural healthcare playbook that we did in May 2022. And then we did an update last summer because we're part of our movement of moving away from putting resources into the void and then wondering whatever happened to that and what did people do and what about those case studies. So we're trying to get really much better about circling back and following up on some of those projects. So I'll move briefly, and I won't spend too long talking about these projects, but this is more going to the much macro level across the country, some sort of higher level projects, just a sort of inspiration of where cross-sector partnerships can take you and how the vital conditions framework is so helpful to understand their impact. So I think next slide. So this one is just around Dartmouth-Hitchcock, which is now Dartmouth Health in New Hampshire. And it's the only academic medical center in the state. And so they became one of the first partners in a collaborative effort with a community action agency that was Southwestern Community Services to create a new bus route that connected Claremont and Lebanon. And so the initial investment was like a $50,000 from, the community benefit dollars. And as a catalyst, it generated additional funding. And at the same time, these partners were able to leverage other community-based organizations, collective knowledge and relationships so that they could get matching funding. So when we spoke with the Action Agency, they don't get any Department of Transportation funding without having a match. And so being the first dollars through the door, they were able to expand on how they got that. So just some of the themes that I wanted to pull out was sort of the location from the medical center is a rural community, but it's got one of the highest median incomes in the state. And then the nearby Claremont, also rural, is much less affluent, has more health challenges. That's a picture that many of you will be familiar with, that pattern. But the communities are interlinked, really. And so to really retain and recruit the workforce that Dartmouth Health needs to support the operations of the hospital they needed, they had to prioritize access to more affordable locations where hospital staff can live, and fill that large volume of jobs. Everybody thinks, superstar surgeons, but it takes a whole bunch of people to keep a health center going. And you need people all across an economic sort of spectrum to be able to keep those things going. They also run a career school to train people for a lot of their frontline jobs and some of their direct care roles. So thanks to this transportation link, there's a larger workforce pool for development. There's more affordable places for hospital staff to live. And it also allows the lower income residents living in Claremont to access the health services that they need. So when we caught up with them, they had also, in the following thing, they had invested in this, in a couple of housing funds. I'll just talk briefly, the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. That was through resident-owned communities, so to be able to preserve affordable housing and have a collective ownership model. So getting back to that centering community in the solutions. So they have about 9,000 people, including Dartmouth employees, that now live in affordable homes that are managed by these resident-owned communities. But this next slide is the key of what I wanted to say. It was really just about breaking down those vital conditions that you can see that, we sort of run a cluster of different vital conditions that are addressed. From transportation, that basic access to healthcare is important, is supported by the transportation, but it also fosters social connection and the ability for older people to be able to connect to the sort of community. So just wanted to sort of, and the meaningful work and wealth, and then the housing facilitates affordable housing and workforce housing to connect it. So I think, what we see nationally, so that there are these kinds of examples, and I won't go through them all for the sake of time, and you can look at them in the playbook anyway, is that we are seeing the same thing, that people are coming together on the ground to make these what seem like insurmountable challenges less insurmountable. They're able to collectively create that action through having that shared framework, but creating it based on those shared visions about centering community voice. And a couple of people mentioned it. It's about capturing hearts, relationships, and trust at the foundation of it. And it's from the people who are running institutions, the people who are working at the level, between community and institutions, and between institutions that are in different silos, that we need to be able to work with our colleagues to also be able to sort of understand how our work relates to them. And we've had such an excellent example of that today, and that kind of connectivity. And I think one more thing that, I'll end on this point in this moment, is that sort of need for courage and that feeling that Kellie mentioned about it's not necessarily feeling safe. And I'll call out that when we did the fact sheet, one of my team called me out, and I was sort of like, hey, we got to get this done, we got to get it finished. And Kevin Leacock stopped me to sort of say, we need to talk about not just this framework, not just this fact sheet, but about also what it takes to make that change. And one of the things he added was around social justice. Progress has always been tied to risk, and about challenging status quo and about challenging systems. So I think coming back to that, it's messy, it can be challenging, it requires courage. I think that is all part of a sign that you're going in the right direction, and part of what we want to see expanding. And being in spaces like this is definitely reaffirming. So I thank you for inviting me in to share.
Thank you so much to Ruth and to all three, Adam, Chuck, Kellie. You've given us a kind of a live window into what it sounds like and what you're seeing in this work. So I think we'll use the last 15 minutes to do two things. If there are questions from anybody about the things you've heard in Winston-Salem or in Ruth's portrait of the, kind of the expanding toolkit that's really coming together in this work, those are all fair game questions. But also, if you see your own signs of momentum, we'll catch some of those too. And in a minute, we'll put up a little poll where you can jot down sort of headlines of what you're seeing. But if there's any clarifying questions or curiosities that you have for any of the speakers, let's start with those. And I know several of you have put some things that stood out to you in the chat, so we'll go to those. But if anybody's got a question on their mind, feel free to come off mute and share it. Could be questions or anything that's really just standing out for you or resonating with you today.
I appreciate what you said, Ruth, in terms of if it's requiring courage and if it feels uncomfortable, then that's a good sign you're going in the right direction. And when we say systems change, to kind of roll off our tongues at times. In some ways, it may, we risk it becoming another buzzword. But I think like just being able to lean in on the fact that, it's change, and change requires that disruption and if you, and it is important because sometimes it feels like it's not right. And you started your conversation, your presentation by saying that, oh gosh, what did you say about that if like how to know if you're doing the right thing. And sometimes we give up, too soon because it feels like, oh, does it take all of this? But I would like to encourage everyone, and I am encouraged just listening to, my colleagues, my peers, and you, Ruth, just with your presentation. And certainly working with Ripple is that it is, we are seeing changes, immediate changes. But when it comes to like really taking on this work, then it is important to make sure that you stay in community because you're doing things typically that you've never done before, in ways that you've never done before. And often, if you're doing it right with people, you've never done it before. And so being able to be a part of a community, and with this Thriving framework, a national model, a national movement is really important. So just, I think like these spaces like this are, we can't take them for granted. And, we have to be intentional to stay rooted because there are a lot of distractions and we can, get off course and think that, well, maybe it's not worth it. And I know with that check-in, it's like, well, do we believe in change? But we're seeing it. We're seeing things happen in real time. But we definitely have to be grounded and rooted in the right places with the right people to be able to have the muscle to continue.
So we've got a terrific question that follows from that rootedness. Tim's question here in the chat. I don't know if you see this, Chuck, about how you sort of draw this tension between spreading to other cities. Other people want Love Out Loud to extend to their city and town, but you've stayed local and went deep. So what's the story there?
Well, no, we all three have just felt this. You can't take the faith guy out of me. This calling, this passion, this like hyper focus on Forsyth County, and in an extreme way, I've watched more people like get some success, write the book, and go on the book tour, and so don't want to do that, and have just felt very compelled to like head down, heart focused, like right here in this local community. And as opportunities present themselves, like this afternoon, I'm on a call tomorrow where we can share our story and best practices. Absolutely happy to do that. And there may become a time when there's more scale to that sharing of what has happened here. But for now, I think we got both our hands full and our hearts, captured by what's happening here. That's not a hard call to make, to just keep the focus right here on the local work.
Nice. Molly, why don't you put up the Mentimeter just so folks, if you have your own headlines or stories of momentum, we're always looking for new insights about where this work is taking hold. So feel free to scan this QR code or go to menti.com and enter this code and share your stories. But let's keep going with some of the other comments here. See, Becky's question is a lesson that you'd offer to others who are just getting going, right? Everybody's at a different stage of development in this. So you've been at it for a few years, or depending how you read history, for decades. So what does it look like to share some lessons that you're learning for others? Just one little piece of guidance that you would give to your former selves, I guess.
Stay humble and learning. I mean, my good. I feel the opposite of I feel like we're just getting started, especially when you think of the multi-generational work of systems change.
Nice.
And so just and what do we learn from one another and like right here among us? So it's not the thriving together, like everyone isn't, that's everyone, like that's people doing, that are coming together to do the work across sectors and all these things. Yeah, and a great phrase I heard used recently is stay curious. And in this age of like we got it all down, our tribe knows that what is best for everybody. That is such a radically countercultural thing to stay curious of other people and their walks and what they're learning.
Yeah, love that. Thank you.
I would just, for me, I think what's coming up is this real focus on the interpersonal, the connections with people. That seems like it's so important, both as a bedrock and as an engine for everything else. It's the people connection between you and the community, between you and your institutions, within the institution, all of that, and the collective, local.
You'd think those thriving together folks should put belonging like in the center of their diagram or something.
Yes.
I'm just reading these stories that are coming up on the screen here. This idea that, funding loss, change of administration, uncertainty, a lot of the times that causes people to shrink their ambition and just do less, for people who are in crisis. But this idea of turning to the multi-solving, don't give up on the ambition, get better at being, taking actions that are going to move multiple values forward. That's a really interesting dimension of this work. And I heard, all of you talked about that in flipping the script from, not just how does everybody touch my organization, but how do I touch them and what do we do together that is bigger than all of us? And it just sort of multi-solving becomes a really frontier practice in doing that. So thank you for whoever put that in as a lead for future stories. You're tired of something, you'll do something about it. Yeah, this asset that comes when like a shared dissatisfaction with the status quo, and enough of us are dissatisfied with the status quo that we're willing to build something new, something maybe that we've never done before, that can be, a real opening for talented organizers like the ones you've heard here today. All of our speakers, if you see any things that are really hitting you on these comments up here, please share. Identify systems as the problem, not the people. Yeah, Kelly, you spoke to this issue, right? Like, what does a system practice really look like? It looks like history and culture and interconnection and place, all these things that we've talked about. And Ruth, you gave us a real insight into when people start doing this work, their deep need to be better equipped with playbooks and tools and policy scans and
Right.
investment guidance. I mean, it's like learning again what it means to do this, with
Right.
serious commitment, but to be equipped as a steward is different than being equipped as a leader for, one issue and organize around that issue, without getting into the full context.
Yeah, and I'll just speak to that great point about systems. I went to the Othering and Belonging Institute conference last year, and I love this quote from John A. Powell. He was speaking and said, "We should be hard on structures and generous to people, and too often we're hard on people and generous to structures and systems." And I think that really speaks to identifying the systems problem and not the people.
That's great.
It's really stuck with me.
Well, the clock is always the real constraint in this work. So it's been a gift to be together with all of you to hear even briefly a little sense of what this work looks like as it's unfolding here in Winston and across the country, and to be joined by, I think at our peak we had 60 some odd colleagues across this work. We'll just end with a little glimpse about some future activities that are coming up that folks might want to know about. Put that one slide up, and so if for longtime members who've been really watching some of the champions of this Thriving Together ethos take shape, and particularly ones that have really been trying to bridge connections of the skill sets and experiences that one designs in this work. So Dr. Maria Rosaria Jackson, who used to run the National Endowment for the Arts, has been an outspoken champion for what it means to connect art and well-being and what that looks like in our quest to thrive together. And she's doing a webinar with Next City. If folks aren't familiar with Next City, it is a steady stream of really good solutions, multi-solving solutions in places. They're terrific curators of great stories. So it's no surprise that that Dr. Jackson is talking about why arts are so vital for healthy communities. This is an open webinar for folks who want to attend, and it's probably one of the fastest ways to generate belonging and civic muscle is through the arts and multicultural expression. And then another upcoming event will be in May, early May, in Winston-Salem, specifically focused on the work that's sort of coming together in the meaning of what it means to be a good ancestor. Kelly, you're helping to organize this. I know Chuck and others are all involved. And so you'll hear more about this through communication channels, but there is a desire to either, if you want to be a speaker at that event or identify people who ought to be in the room or meet and strategize, the folks in Winston-Salem and the WIN Network and We in the World are all eager to hear thoughts about how to make this first of several regional convenings be really meaningful. With that, we will say thanks for everyone's time and attention today. If there's, keep an eye out. We're going to do several more of these in calendar year 25. And, we're always looking for signs of this rising movement because it moves because of all of you. So thanks to the whole team at Community Initiatives and IP3 and our team at Rethink Health. And to all of you, we will continue this work with great joy. Thanks.